Hello. The Divine Code reading for August 15th, pages 137 and 138. And today I'll be looking at footnote number 9. It's a long footnote, and it begins at 136, at the bottom 136, and continues through most of the next two pages. And topic number 3 will be, which is at the very top of 138, beginning at the top of 138, but it continues into 139. So I'm just going to focus on footnote number 9 and allow topic 3 for tomorrow. Footnote number 9. And this footnote concentrates on details of shituf, which is the belief that God has partnership with other powers, that there are other powers that have a semi-autonomous power that operates as part of God's cabinet or part of God's court, heavenly court, but that they have some, that a person can go independently through the shituf and interact with God through an independent power. So there's a lot of controversy as to whether or not that's okay for non-Jews, and these are sources, these are rabbinic sources that look at this question. It is clear from Rambam's intentions in Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, Chapter 1, Topic 2, Laws of Repentance, Chapter 3, Topic 7, and elsewhere, that this belief in an intermediary power is also the essence of idol worship. So the essence of idol, it's not actually idol worship necessarily. At this point, it's not saying, but it would not be in the essence, like it's the inner core is the belief that there's independent powers. That there's powers that kind of break away from God and are able to stand on their own, even if they're standing within the context of God. Just the fact that they're separated to some extent would be the essence of idol worship, which can lead to full-blown idol worship, or may actually be idol worship. We're looking at the sources right now to ask that question. In Laws of Kings 9:2, he concludes, Rambam concludes that writes that any act of idol worship is a capital sin for a Jew, is also a capital sin for a Gentile. So we learn out the laws, the very specific laws of what is prohibited for a non-Jew are all the items that are considered a capital offense for the Jew. Because in idol worship, for a Jew, there might be certain things that are a capital sin and certain things that are other than a capital sin for a Jew. So specifically, the areas that are a capital sin are the areas that are prohibited to the non-Jew and would also be a capital sin. However, Ramah, that's Rabbi Moshe Isserles, on Or Chaim 156, rules that the false belief in an intermediary is permitted for Gentiles, and in his Darkei Moshe, Or Chaim there, it is explained in more detail in regard to traditional Christian doctrine, as quoted there. So in Rabbi Moshe Isserles' Darkei Moshe, it says, it is written in Sefer Toldos Adam Bakana, to be Adam and Eve, by Rabbeinu Yerucham Rabbi Yitzchak writes that it is permitted to accept an oath from a worshiper of Yeshua who swears in his religion. If he swears by God and does not mention the name Yeshua, even if he mentions God's name in the oath with the intention of including Yeshua, because he still includes it with his intention for the creator of heaven and earth. But if he connects the name of God with his belief in another power, nevertheless, it is not prohibited for one to cause a Gentile to mention his belief in an intermediary, even in an oath. Also, the prohibition of placing a stumbling block before the blind does not apply, since it is not forbidden for Gentiles to believe in an intermediary. This is also written in Tosafot on Tractate Berkut 2b. And there it mentions that the B'nai Noach are not warned or commanded concerning shituf, or the belief in an intermediary, or also called partnership. The if it was a prohibition, that means a full-on prohibition, not a rabbinic, a full-on prohibition for a non-Jew believing in an intermediary. He has it in his mind. If that was a total prohibition, the Jew would not be allowed to have the person swear in the name of God if the non-Jew is including the partnership, because the non-Jew is not allowed to cause a Jew to the Jew is not allowed to cause a non-Jew to sin. So the fact that he's allowed to do this indicates that it's not a full-blown sin for a non-Jew. It would be if the other person was a Jew. If the Jew was interacting with another Jew who believed in an intermediary power, and the Jew was causing the other Jew to swear an oath that included the belief in a intermediary power, that would be forbidden for Jews. But it's not forbidden regarding the non-Jew. That's what he's looking at here. It is also written in Tosafot on Tractate Sanhedrin 63b and Piskei Harash Sanhedrin chapter 7. The implication of these sources is that the concept of a divine trinity is actual idol worship, and swearing verbally in the name of God and another power, such as Yeshua, would be forbidden for Gentiles. But since they mention only God without saying clearly that they also mean Yeshua, it is considered in practical terms as including an intermediary in the oath. This is not prohibited to Gentiles, and therefore, if a Jew requires that a Christian should make an oath in God's name, it is permitted. So here would be another case where the question is whether, the question being addressed here is whether the intellectual belief in shituf is belief in an intermediary is permitted for a non-Jew. Not whether or not it's okay, but whether it is a halakhic prohibition for a non-Jew to have that thought in his mind. However, one can only derive from these sources that such an oath combines God's power with an intermediary, which may be Yeshua or the souls of individuals who the person considers to be saints. That might be similar to someone saying that they swear an oath on somebody's grave, a relative's grave. That expression is used in some circles. This belief and the mention in it is not prohibited to Gentiles, and therefore they are allowed to swear in this manner. However, if one bows down before a physical statue or image, it becomes actual idol worship. The explanation above from Tosafot and Ramak is accepted by most later rabbinical authorities. Nota by the Yehuda, Volume 2, Chapter 138, Shire, Ephraim, Chapter 24, Minhuk, Kinuk, Commandments 26, 86, and others. So that the belief in and of itself is not considered full-blown idol worship. It may be inappropriate, it may not be the best way for one to believe, but it's not considered an actual act of idol worship. It's not the same as if the person had a statue of the intermediary and bowed down before the statue of the intermediary. That would be considered idol worship. But just simply having it in his head that he hasn't acted on, and he's using the oath in God's name, he's not using the oath in the name of the intermediary, therefore the oath can be accepted. The distinction between belief and actual idol worship is clear in the following section quoted from Sefer Mitzvah Gadol, Prohibition 1. We're quoting from that. One may not bring to mind the thought that there is any God besides the Lord, as it says in the Ten Commandments, that's Exodus 23, there shall not be for you other gods before me. From which we see that the Torah forbids the taking of an oath in the name of an idol. This includes the belief in an intermediary, since if one doesn't actually serve it, in Makilta it says, the inference is that it is the inference that is clear from the verse, you shall not make for yourselves a carved image, is not to create one. From where do I know that one should not keep in existence one that already exists? However, the verse's interpretation can be taken out of simple meaning. The verse's interpretation cannot be taken out of the simple meaning of the text. So in the Ten Commandments, it's referring, in this particular section, is referring to actual idol worship. It's not referring to a belief. So we can't take from this section belief. Now there's other areas we could take it, but he's referring specifically to this area, that we have to not be philosophically inferring things, but rather reading what's actually said. Furthermore, the words before me, that is in my presence, are interpreted simply as a combining of God's name with the name of another. In Tractate Sanhedrin 63a, it says that one who combines God's name with that of another will be uprooted from the world. So it says in Exodus 22:19, one who slaughters sacrifices to the gods will be destroyed. This is allowed only to the Lord alone. So the person combines it. The question is whether or not the combination is not permitted. The question is if the person says the words God and then includes the intermediary, that would not be allowed. Okay, everyone agrees on that. But the question is whether the person thinking understands that it includes the intermediary. And on the level of thinking, if that, whether or not that applies to if the Gentile, I mean, specifically, we're looking at the question of whether or not the Jew can accept the oath, which is a little bit of a different question. But from that, we're learning what is strictly prohibited versus what would be strictly permitted. In quote on that. The exclamation of his words, that's the one we just, in the Sefer Mitzvah Gadol, is that the Nikilta explains the verse, "There shall not be other gods before me," to mean that one may not keep an idol in existence. However, the simple meaning of the verse is not referring to this. Rather, the prohibition of keeping an idol in existence is learned from the verse, "You shall not bring an abomination into your house." And it is written by Rambam in Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, 7:2. The simple meaning of the verse, "There shall not be for you other gods before me," is that one may not have idols, other gods, in any way, even in a way of an intermediary. He brings proof from Tractate Sanhedrin, which explains that the verse cited above, "One who brings offerings to the gods will be destroyed. Sacrifice is allowed only to the Lord alone," is referring to a punishment specifically to one who sacrifices or does some other act of idol worship. However, the prohibition itself applies only to one who does not. However, the prohibition itself applies even for one who does not actively serve idols, but accepts idols and swears by them. We see from this that the concept of an intermediary refers to believing that there's a partner along with God, as expressed either in one's thoughts or speech, and this does not necessarily need to be active service. So here in the Rambam's The Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, he's understanding that it would include the belief in the intermediary would also be prohibited. This is the belief in an intermediary, as Tosafot writes, is not this is the belief in an intermediary that, as Tosafot writes, is not prohibited to Gentiles, meaning to believe and swear in both God's name and another's name. However, it is not permitted for a Gentile to perform an active service of idol worship. So here it might be arguing that the person would actually, the non-Jew would actually be able to swear in God's name and the other intermediary's name. The whole question is not over what is proper. At this point, we're not asking what's proper. What we're asking is what the strict halakha is concerning this. It is also clear from Rima in Yoredea, chapter 141, that it is prohibited to believe, it is prohibited to benefit from even a plain crucifix icon unless it is nullified. See chapter 8 below on nullification of idolatrous images with the permissibility of a plain cross if it is only for decoration. Why would it be prohibited to benefit from this if it is not an idol that is forbidden to a Gentile? Therefore, it obviously involves actual idol worship, and the object needs to be nullified before it can be used for any benefit. So the question there is whether the cross, a person has a cross as a necklace, and would they be allowed to use that cross? If it's been used in idol worship, it would not be permitted. So, or if it, what the question is whether or not the cross is an idolatrous object. But the cross involves idol, the belief in a intermediary. But at what point does the belief in the intermediary become prohibited? That's really the question. At what point? At some point it might be permitted as a pure belief, but if a person makes a cross, it may be prohibited. That's what they're trying to parse out here. The conclusion of this subject is in the words of the Qasim Sofer, note on Shokan Orachaim, chapter 156. The main opinion is that a Gentile is liable for actually worshiping an intermediary. So the actual worship, which we're going to go into later on in this book, the actual worship would be prohibited. That means that the belief in it would be okay for a regular Gentile. I may want to mention at this point, and it's mentioned elsewhere, it's mentioned in the Divine Code, that certain areas of halakha change if a person is taking on the status of accepting the 7 laws because they're given by Moses, through Moses. If a person is taking on the Torah aspects of the 7 laws, rather than simply following them as a regular human being, if the person is doing that, there are certain nuanced changes, and in that case, it becomes much more stricter. Even the belief in intermediary would be prohibited at that point. But for what we're speaking right now is a straight halakha regarding the non-Jew, regarding the belief in an intermediary, and it crosses the line when that belief turns into worshiping the intermediary. Thank you.